Hi, I'm Pete Vanderbeek and haven't made a video for some time. Had been experimenting with doing so before, but I feel compelled today to make one in response to watching an interview with Phillip Yancey by Carey Nieuwhof. And they are talking about his latest book, which is basically his biography. I, like Carey, have been shaped a lot by Yancey's writing and always had a sense of curiosity about what shaped his thinking, what shaped his conclusions. And so this interview, and likely the book as well, will answer that curiosity. And at one point in the interview, a point I found quite moving and actually electrifying for myself, because it was obviously such for Phillip Yancey, was when he talked about his main switchover experience, his main, I don't want to use the kind of regular terminology, but it was a new reality awakening moment for him, for sure, where he talks about being known as kind of a rebel on campus at a Bible college, and how he wouldn't take his turn praying in a group, and then finally when he did, he made a pretty honest and yet defiant prayer. All of that you can catch if you watch the full interview. But I've taken a clip of what he says next. It's a couple minutes long, where he describes a moment where, in that rebellious prayer, really, that rebellious, honest prayer, he doesn't know what to call it, a vision, an insight that is related to the parable of the Good Samaritan. So I'll just play that piece because that sets up what I want to say next.
Polite, maybe 10 seconds. I never prayed. They knew who I was. I was the campus renegade. Well, we had been given an assignment in a class to write a paper on some time when God spoke to you. And I was racking my brain because I believed God had never spoken to me. And if he did, I couldn't tell it from the times when I thought he spoke to me. Again, how do you tell the real from the fake? So I didn't know what in the world I was going to write about. But that was in the back of my mind. And for some reason, I have no idea why, for the only time that semester, Joe prayed, Chris prayed, Craig prayed, then they paused, and I prayed. And my prayer went like this: God, we're supposed to go down to that university and keep these kids from going to hell. But frankly, I don't care if they all go to hell. And I mean, you'd have to go on a Bible college campus to realize how that came across at the time. I could have been doing witchcraft dances naked and it wouldn't have had any more effect, So it was very tense in the room. And then I said, I don't care if I go to hell. And even more tense. And just one of these kind of sassy, arrogant prayers of need. And then I had a revelation. I mean, I actually saw this. You could call it a vision, I suppose. Who knows? But I had recently been reading the story of the Good Samaritan. And I actually saw a person I took to be the Good Samaritan who came across this muddied, filthy tramp lying in a ditch. And the religious people passed him by. And then the Samaritan, the heretic, came and bent over. And I saw that I was actually the tramp in the ditch. I mean, my face was the face of the tramp in the ditch. And the Samaritan bent over me, and I saw actually it wasn't a Samaritan. It was Jesus, the face of Jesus. And every time he would bend over, I would spit in his face. And it was a revelation. That's all I saw. It was just so shocking because that's obviously not what this parable of the Good Samaritan is about, but but it just came from nowhere. How could I have come up with that? And it exposed me for what I was. I thought I was smarter, more sophisticated, more enlightened than the people at this Bible college campus. And then I saw I was the neediest one of all.
Wow.
And when God tried to express grace, I would spit in his face. And I just didn't know what to do. Finally, I just got up and left the room. I didn't finish the prayer. And I said, please don't ever ask me about this again to my friends. Well, then I tell the story. We were supposed to read these things in class, but they almost ran out of class time. And
I think the best way to do this part of my video is to just speak as if I'm speaking to Phillip Yancey myself directly. I looked into ways to somehow connect with him by email. I even know another writer who's of my tribe who might be able to get me access. And then I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna make the video and put it out there. Maybe Carrie's people will see it. But this was so striking for me because over my journey of faith, I've been led to an understanding of the parable that is exactly pretty much what he experienced, what you experienced, Philip, in the sense that, well, I think the best thing is I'm just going to insert a clip of me preaching that part of the parable. And again, I'll put a link to the whole thing if people want to see the full sermon. But it really bothered me that you, Philip, said that's obviously not what the parable of the Good Samaritan is about. Because I think it is. Not exactly addressing your situation, because the person Jesus is addressing is a legalist. But there's a sense in which, from what I gather from your story that you tell in this interview, that you were trapped under a legalistic way, a version of Christianity that you didn't know how to get out of. And so that's where I would say I would take your defiance as coming from, and yet it was an honest defiance. And so here's the clip. I think it'll speak best.
And in the story, who needed neighboring? Not just the parable, but the whole passage. Who is the most in need of neighboring? Helpless ones. Who's the most helpless in the passage? My understanding now is that it is the expert in the law. He's working so hard to help himself earn eternity with God, and does not see his helplessness. Jesus was trying to get him to see that helplessness. The only character he left him in the parable was the man who was helpless by the side of the road. He wasn't the priest. He wasn't the Levite. He's certainly not the Samaritan. So now he's got one person left. And so Jesus, in the way he does this, don't you see the brilliance of it? In the way he does this, by not putting a character that represented him into the parable, obviously, is trying to get him to see that this Samaritanish man standing in front of him with these strange teachings that appeared to go against the law he held so dear as a guide to earning his own way into eternal life, that this Samaritanish man was there to neighbor him. If he could only see his helplessness. If only he could actually see that he was helpless before the law he loved so much. And if only he could then admit his need for help. If he could come to a point where he could say, I am helpless by the side of the road. This law has beaten me up so bad. I can't do this myself. God, I need help. then there's an opportunity for him to enter salvation in a way he can't at this point imagine, to enter relationship with God the Father by grace and mercy and compassion. So we cannot go and love our neighbor unless we recognize how we've been neighbored first by Jesus. You could be on a pretty good faith journey, and if you haven't understood that yet, like I said, this was pivotal in my own faith journey, where all of a sudden all the lights came on in Bible passages all over the place. This was something I had not understood clearly before I think this happened to me in my early 30s. Cannot go out and love our neighbor unless we recognize how Jesus neighbored us first and how we needed it. Until we have experienced and recognized how impossible it is to earn our own salvation by the right doing, and how helpless we are before the law of God, we cannot understand the lavish, gracious, and I'm going to start enjoying saying reckless, eternal life-bringing neighboring that Jesus offers. And we keep instead saying, I'll figure it out myself. I'll study a little bit more. I will not submit to my helplessness. I don't need your help, Jesus. And we try to do it ourselves. And in his eyes, he has compassion on us as we do that. And he sees our helplessness and he wants to help us see it and admit it ourselves to him. And once we have seen and acknowledged our helplessness and accepted help from the guy with the weird stories that show us God is exceedingly merciful and will do almost anything to open up the possibility of relationship again, till we see that, we won't change. And at that point, we will change when we see that. And that change is a way of entering a new way of being, of neighboring. Because we will have the law written on our heart like the Samaritan character in the parable. And we will move away from the way of doing. It is huge, at least for me. I hope you're catching some of that too. And maybe, yes, you are thinking, some of you who were at the event yesterday where we talked about the history and
So in my understanding of what Jesus was doing in the parable, besides the doing versus being approach, he's trying to get the legal expert, the man stuck under the law, thinking the law was going to save him if he understood it properly. He was trying to get him to see how helpless he was. And that's where it was electrifying for me to hear you speak about kind of a helpless moment of need. You even describe it that way yourself. And then having this insight or this vision. And I'm actually not the kind of self-promoting pastor that pushes his sermons on people in that way, but I need to tell you that it was just very striking for me to have your experience that was pivotal in your life be so closely associated with the conclusions I'd come to about that parable. So I hope this has value to somebody and maybe even gets to Phillip Yancey himself, and that there's this moment of connection.